Today, we're diving deep into a dark fable. It's a story about a kingdom that was so sure it could just wall out the night. They were wrong. They were about to discover that the most terrifying shadows are always the ones that grow from within. And it all starts with this one single idea. A fragile promise, really. It's that feeling of safety, right? That sense of certainty. The collective belief that if you just don't look at something, it can't possibly hurt you. This wasn't just an idea. It was the very foundation of a kingdom that was so proud of its bright, sunlit streets. So let's start there, with the kingdom's fragile promise. This is all about the core delusion they were living by. The source material calls it something perfect, the arrogance of comfortable ignorance. And this really gets to the heart of their self-deception. On the one hand, you have the illusion they all bought into. A world of high walls, barred doors, this idea of a bright, safe horizon. See, they thought that being able to lock a door meant they had the power to banish darkness forever. But the reality? Well, the reality was a deep, comfortable state of denial. It was a group choice to ignore what they called the rot within, their own foundation, to just turn a blind eye to generation after generation of warnings.
There's actually a philosophical name for this kind of mindset, the last man. It describes a society that literally chooses shallow contentment over hard truths. It's about a people who would much rather have the predictable safety of a leash, a comfortable, easy, risk-averse life, than have to confront any messy, inconvenient truths about who they really are. They basically traded their soul for comfort.
And that, of course, brings us to our second act, the inevitable harvest. Because, well, when you ignore the rot for that long, something is bound to grow. This is the part of the story where their silence, their denial, it all starts to bear this absolutely terrible fruit. And this line says it all. The kingdom mistook their silence for peace. They thought their ignorance was a form of strength. They couldn't have been more wrong. That silence wasn't keeping the darkness away. It was feeding it. It was giving it the time and the space to grow into something unimaginable. So how did this nightmare come to be? It wasn't some random attack. No, it was a cultivation, a slow, methodical process. It started with generations of warnings they just decided to ignore. Then, on top of that, they built a foundation of excused cruelties. The small injustices, the little moral compromises that they let fester. And finally, it all buckled under the crushing weight of their buried shames. These weren't just cracks in the foundation. This was the soil from which the monster grew. So the darkness they tried so hard to bury, it didn't just die down there. Oh no, it transformed. Fed by all that denial, it grew wings. The very problem they thought was safely locked away beneath their feet was now circling in the sky above them. It was inescapable.
Which, of course, leads to the absolute central question of this whole tragedy. What was this thing? What was this unspeakable horror that grew from their own neglect and turned the very sky into a devouring mouth?
And here we are, the third act, the monster in the mirror. This is the climax of the story, the brutal, long-overdue confession that's waiting at the heart of their ruin. The monster wasn't a beast. It wasn't some invading army. It was a mirror. The city didn't fall to some external force. It collapsed under the crushing weight of its own reflection. Think about that. The horror that consumed them wasn't a monster from the outside. It was the physical manifestation of all their buried shame, their excused cruelties, and their ignored warnings, all rolled into one. The fire that burned their towers to the ground, that wasn't some external tragedy. It was an internal confession, made brutally visible for the entire world to see. Which brings us to the bleak, bleak aftermath. A vacuum of meaninglessness. I mean, what happens when the lie you've built your entire world on is suddenly incinerated, leaving nothing behind but ash? Well, the survivors found themselves plunged into a state of nihilism. The sources describe this as what happens when the old sun of divine guidance, that's their core beliefs, their sense of purpose, their feeling of safety, when that sun finally sets, and all that's left is this heavy fog, this vacuum where all their old truths no longer provide any meaning and, crucially, no longer offer any protection. And so they just wander the ruins, cursed. Because they finally have the truth, right? They see things as they really are for the first time, but it's a hollow knowledge. It's a kind of wisdom that came at the cost of literally everything they ever had. And this knowledge,
It infects every single part of their existence. Even something as simple as sleeping has become a chore. I mean, how can you possibly rest? How can you dream when you know for a fact that the horizon itself can become a mouth? That the sky you once trusted can turn against you? So, what happens now? This final act, the descent into truth, it lays out the difficult choice that every single survivor has to make, standing there in the ashes of their old world. From this void, two paths appear. On the one hand, you have the path of the new idol. This is basically retreating right back into denial. It's embracing another lie, a cold monster that offers a rigid, mechanical kind of safety for anyone too terrified to actually face themselves. But then, there's the much, much harder path, the creative fire. This one requires a painful downgoing, a deep descent into yourself to dismantle what's left of your old beliefs and forge something new, something authentic. So, true rebuilding, it turns out, was never about new walls. It wasn't about finding a better illusion to hide behind. The only real path forward, away from the smoke and the stagnation of the past, is a painful, honest descent into the self, to create new truths from the ashes of the old ones. And that leaves us with one final, pretty haunting thought. This story, it isn't just about some mythical kingdom. It's a mirror for us, too. So we have to ask ourselves, what comfortable lies are we telling? What warnings are we choosing to ignore? What are we leaving to fester in our own foundations, just waiting, silently, for the day it learns to soar?